Hi guys, this is Catherine Mitchell. This is my presentation for Research Paper 1 for HSEM 445, Spring Semester 2017 at UAF. For the research paper, we were supposed to be looking into how a company or organization utilized the media in response to a crisis. So for that prompt, I chose to look into how Southwest Airlines utilized the media to respond to the crash of Flight 345 at LaGuardia Airport on July 22nd, 2013. So the crash happened, like I said, at LaGuardia. It was a Boeing 737-700 aircraft. That particular aircraft had been in service with Southwest for about 13 years. The aircraft itself had no problems. It was routinely inspected just 4 days before the crash, and everything was good to go. The eventual fault of the crash was laid at the feet of the pilot and the first officer, who both had over 30 years combined flight experience. The National Transportation Safety Board and the FAA eventually discovered through listening to the flight log and those recordings that the pilot and the first officer were unable to come to an agreement about the controls of the aircraft and some of the settings coming in for the landing, thus leading to the aircraft coming in to the runway too steep, and it landed on its front landing gear instead of its rear wheels, and it collapsed forward, causing the landing gear to come inside the body of the aircraft and damage some of the electronics. The aircraft eventually skidded about 2,000 feet across the runway and came to a rest. Luckily, during this incident, none of the passengers or crew were killed. There were about 16 minor injuries, but no one died. Southwest, in my opinion, responded very positively to this situation. So within 30 minutes of the impact, they had reached out on Twitter to their passengers and consumers stating there was this crash. At this time, there were no fatalities. They were addressing the situation and that they were gathering information and would put out a statement soon. They followed that up just a few hours later with an official statement saying that the flight had crashed upon landing. There was no emergency situation at the time. Everybody had been evacuated off the plane. There were some minor injuries, no serious injuries, and that they had already contacted the FAA and the NTSB to start an investigation into what had happened. 3 days later, the CEO of the company, Gary Kelly, went on Fox News and did an interview just talking about the crash and what the company was doing. And this is where I think Southwest really did a very good job utilizing the media, because during the interview, the interviewer made a note to Kelly about Boeing having several problems recently and if the CEO was going to attribute this crash to those problems. And the CEO was very quick to not point fingers. He stated that they had been working with Boeing since the start of their company in 1967, and that Boeing was a great company. They weren't going to lay blame at Boeing's feet, and that the investigation was ongoing, so it would be inappropriate to point fingers. I think this was a really, really strong move on the part of Southwest to own up to the fact that the crash wasn't going to be blamed on some outside source, and that they were doing an internal and external investigation to figure out what truly happened so that they could prevent it from happening again. And the CEO had a great quote that said, "Any is too many," in regards to crashes, which I think says something pretty powerful to consumers and stockholders of this kind of company that says, this happened and it's bad, and we're going to do everything in our power not to let it happen again. Up until this point, Southwest had only 8 instances since 1971, when it took its first flight, that required investigation. And none of those instances resulted in a fatality. So it says a lot for the company's safety rating. I think Southwest did a very good job of putting itself at the forefront of the conversation and kind of controlling that initial media presence in regards to the crash, rather than waiting for the media to come to them and say, "Hey, this crash happened. Do you have a statement? Do you have this?" They reached out on Twitter, of all media platforms, which again I think is smart. Twitter is very popular. People in the airport are on their smartphones. It's a great way to reach consumers. And saying, "Hey, we know this happened. This is the situation. This is how we're dealing with it." And then they're controlling the outflow of information. So they're controlling what gets said, who says it, rather than allowing media outlets to speculate and then circulate false information and false data. So Southwest really took a proactive rather than reactive stance towards this crisis. And really, this crisis could have caused a lot of damage for an airline company. Safety is something people really consider when they decide to fly. So a great company like Southwest, who had such a really nice safety rating, could have been really hurt financially if people chose not to use their company over this instance. So I was really impressed with Southwest and how they chose to use social media initially to reach out to people, and then following that up with formal statements, and then a interview with the CEO. I did cite the article that we read a little bit earlier in the semester about the 3 O's of crisis management, and I think that Southwest really hit those, which were to own up to it and to put the CEO out front. The only one they probably didn't that I don't have as much information on is making an outsized response, but really they did do that. They initially, within those first few hours, contacted the FAA, which is regulation. They also contacted the National Transportation Safety Board and opened an investigation, and were very transparent with the media about what was going on. So there's more details in my paper if you guys are interested, but thanks so much for listening.